"Your kids don't belong at this table," my stepmother said. It was my table. The sentence that ended my stepmother's 3-year renovation project was 11 words long, spoken at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday in November, in a room she had repainted twice without asking anyone's permission. She said, "Your kids don't belong at this table." And I remember thinking, with the particular clarity that comes only when you have been calm for too long, that is the most expensive thing she has ever said. I should back up. My name is Carter Hale. I'm 41 years old. I'm a large animal veterinarian based out of Bozeman, Montana, which means I spend most of my professional life elbow deep in horses and cattle and the occasional panicked llama, and very little of my professional life sitting still. My hands are rough. My truck smells like antiseptic and hay, and something I prefer not to identify. My 2 kids, Willa and Theo, 11 and 8, respectively, think I am moderately interesting on the days I come home with a good story, and thoroughly boring on all the others. I am telling you this because context matters, and because the kind of person I am is relevant to what I did, and what I didn't do for 3 years before that November Thursday. I am not a dramatic man. I was raised by a woman who handled difficulty with quiet efficiency, and a man who, after she died, replaced quiet efficiency with whoever made him feel less alone. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it's accurate. My mother died 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to funeral, which is the kind of timeline that doesn't leave room for anything. Not for last words, not for long goodbyes, not for anything except the machinery of grief running at full speed in a body that hasn't caught up yet. She was 58. She had a laugh that started somewhere in her chest and arrived about 3 seconds after the joke landed, delayed like thunder after lightning. I still catch myself waiting for it sometimes. My father, David Hale, married Carolyn Pfister 14 months after my mother's funeral. I'll let you do the math on that. Carolyn was not a monster. I want to be precise about this, because the story I'm telling you could easily collapse into the kind of narrative where the stepmother is a cartoon villain and the protagonist is a saint, and neither of those things are true. Carolyn was a 60-year-old woman from Billings who had been divorced twice, who collected decorative ceramic owls with an intensity that bordered on spiritual commitment, and who loved my father with a sincerity I could not dispute even when it inconvenienced me. She laughed at his jokes. She made sure he took his blood pressure medication. She called him Davy, which was, to my knowledge, a name no other living human had ever used for him, and which he apparently enjoyed. She was also, and I say this with the full weight of 3 years of evidence, a woman who had decided that moving into my father's home meant she had inherited the right to make every decision about it. The redecorating started small. New curtains in the kitchen. Fine. The old ones were from approximately 1987 and had given up on being curtains. A new couch in the living room. Also fine. The original couch was a brown corduroy monstrosity my father had purchased at a garage sale, and which smelled, permanently, of decades of ranch dogs. A new bathroom vanity. A new back door. A coat of paint in the hallway. A color she described as warm taupe, and which I would describe as the inside of a cardboard box, if the box were depressed. None of this required my permission. I want to be clear about that. I was living 20 minutes away in a rental near the clinic, splitting custody of Willa and Theo with my ex-wife Meredith, and I was not present for the slow metamorphosis happening at my father's place. My father mentioned things in passing. New flooring in the master bedroom, a new washer-dryer set, kitchen cabinets, refinished in a cream white that he described, over the phone, with the particular verbal shrug of a man who had long since stopped tracking interior design decisions. I visited for holidays and the occasional weekend. I noticed changes. I didn't say much. Here is my fallibility, since we might as well name it. I had spent the better part of my adult life not saying much. My mother had been the quiet efficiency person, and I had inherited the efficiency without the quiet confidence beneath it. She knew when to hold a line. I had her discipline without her certainty. In the years after she died, and especially in the first years of my father's marriage, I told myself that saying something would only make things harder for everyone, that my father deserved happiness, that Carolyn wasn't doing anything technically wrong. I was correct about all of those things, and wrong about what they meant. The first time I brought Willa and Theo to the house after the marriage, Carolyn had them eat in the kitchen. The dining room, she explained, was set up for adults. The kids' table was the kitchen table, and she had placed it with a cheerfulness that I can only describe as weaponized. Placemats with cartoon animals, paper napkins. She had clearly put effort into it, which was the precise mechanism by which it was impossible to object to. You can't be angry at effort. You can only be angry at what the effort is covering. I let it go. I ate at the adult table and listened to my kids through the kitchen doorway, and told myself it was a one-time adjustment, a new household finding its footing, nothing worth a conversation that would ruin the evening for my father. This happened again at Easter, and again at the 4th of July, and again, with variations, at every gathering for the next 2.5 years, until my children, who were smart, perceptive children, had internalized, at the cellular level, that they were guests in that house, and not family. Willa told me once, in the truck on the way home from Christmas, that she didn't really like going to Grandpa's house. She said it the way kids say things they know are complicated, carefully, watching my face in the rearview mirror, ready to walk it back if she'd broken something. I told her that was okay. She nodded, looked out the window, and didn't say anything else. I spent the next 15 minutes not being as angry as I should have been, and the 15 minutes after that being much angrier than I'd allowed myself to be. Theo, who was 6 at the time, had asked Carolyn once if he could look at the photos on the hallway wall. They were family photos, mine and my father's and my mother's. Carolyn had told him not to touch anything. He had said he wasn't going to touch them, just look. She told him those were fragile, and that the hallway was not a place for children. Those photos included 3 pictures of me at Theo's age. I'm telling you all of this because I need you to understand the temperature of the water before I tell you how it finally boiled. Now, and this is the part where the story stops being about dinner tables and starts being about something else. I need to tell you about the property itself. My mother's name was Eleanor Hale, née Rutherford, and she was, among other things, meticulous about paperwork. She had grown up watching her own parents lose a farm through a combination of bad luck and worse estate planning, and she had resolved, with characteristic, quiet efficiency, that this would not happen to her children. When she was diagnosed, and she knew, even in those first 7 weeks, that she was not going to survive this, she made a series of legal arrangements that were thorough, forward-looking, and, as it turned out, prescient in ways she may not have fully intended. The house, the ranch property on the east side of the Gallatin Valley, 42 acres, the main house, the barn, the outbuildings, all of it, did not go to my father when she died. It went to a trust, the Eleanor Hale Family Trust, established in the final weeks of her life, administered by me, with my father holding a lifetime tenancy, meaning he could live there, use the property, be comfortable there for the rest of his life. But he did not own it. He could not sell it, refinance it, substantially modify it without trustee approval, or make permanent decisions about it unilaterally. The trustee was me. I had not advertised this. My father knew. His attorney knew. The county recorder's office knew, because that's where such things are recorded. But it was not, in the 3 years of Carolyn's occupation and renovation and general installation of herself into the fabric of that house, a fact that anyone had apparently communicated to her. I found out what Carolyn didn't know on a Tuesday in October, 6 weeks before Thanksgiving, when my father called to say that Carolyn had been in touch with a contractor about an addition to the back of the house, a sunroom, she'd decided, with a specific kind of heated tile floor she'd seen in a magazine. And the contractor had asked about permits, and the permits had required a property search, and the property search had returned the name of the trust, and the trust had returned my name, and the contractor had, reasonably, asked who exactly was authorizing this project. My father called me and said, "I might have a situation." "How long has she been planning this?" I asked. "A while," he said. "She's had the magazine pages for about a year." "And she didn't ask you?" A pause. "She thought. She assumed. She assumed it was yours to approve." "She's been under the impression," my father said, with the careful verbal delicacy of a man walking across ice he can suddenly feel flexing underfoot, "that the house is mine." I want to tell you that I was shocked. I want to tell you that I couldn't believe my father had allowed this assumption to live and breathe and grow magazine-page sunroom plans for 3 years without correcting it. But the truth is, I wasn't shocked. I was something colder and more specific than shocked. I was illuminated. The way you are when a light comes on in a room you've been navigating in the dark, and suddenly all the furniture you've been bumping into for years snaps into its actual shape. "Dad," I said, "does Carolyn know that the house is in the trust?" Another pause. Longer. "I was going to explain it," he said. "Over what timeline?" He didn't answer that. I drove to the clinic, saw 4 horses and a dog with a torn ligament, went home and stood at my kitchen sink for a while looking out the window. The mountains were doing what they do in October in Montana. Enormous and indifferent. Snow already on the upper peaks. The valley below still holding on to the last of the amber. It was, objectively, beautiful. I was not in a position to appreciate it. I decided, in the weeks between that phone call and Thanksgiving, to do nothing dramatic. This was shaped more by my aversion to conflict than by strategic thinking, but it had a certain logic. The sunroom was stalled. The contractor wasn't moving forward without authorization, and I hadn't given it. Carolyn didn't know why it had stalled. My father had told her there were some permit issues, which was technically true, in the same way that describing a house fire as a heating situation is technically true. I told myself I would handle it after the holidays. If you are the kind of person who has ever told yourself you will handle something after the holidays, you already know how this ends. Thanksgiving at the Hale property was a production that Carolyn had, over 3 years, refined into something that looked like tradition but was, in fact, a performance of her own preferences dressed up in the language of family. She cooked for 2 days. She used tablecloths my mother had never used. New ones. White linen with a pressed crease, staged with the care of a home goods catalog. She arranged the centerpiece herself, every year, with the precision of a woman who had strong opinions and the discipline to execute them. Autumn botanicals, real gourds, a specific style of taper candle she sourced from a shop in downtown Bozeman, and which cost more per candle than I generally spent on lunch. The dining room table was my grandfather's table. I should have mentioned this earlier. The walnut table that my grandfather, Robert Rutherford, built by hand in a barn in Gallatin County in 1947. Thick-legged, dark-grained, slightly uneven in the way that hand-built things are, with a surface that had held 6 decades of meals and arguments and celebrations and ordinary evenings. My mother had grown up eating at that table. When she married my father and they moved to the ranch, the table came with her. When she died, the table was in the dining room where it had always been, and I had not thought consciously about it in years, in the way you don't think consciously about things that have simply always been there. Carolyn had reupholstered the chairs around it. New fabric, a deep burgundy. She'd placed a glass protector over the surface, bought without asking, which covered the wood entirely. I noticed these things the way you notice things when the volume on your attention has been quietly turned up. I arrived at 2 p.m. with Willa and Theo. The valley had gone sharp and cold by then. The kind of cold that has teeth. Frost still on the fence posts at midday. The sky a clean pale blue that in Montana means the cold is serious and committed. The barn was closed up. The horses, 3 of them, my father's, old animals that had survived the transition into Carolyn's era with their dignity largely intact, were visible in the paddock, steam rising off their backs in slow curls that dissolved before they reached any real height. My father met us at the door. He hugged Willa and messed up Theo's hair and asked me something about a surgery I'd mentioned on the phone. This was how my father showed love, by remembering the details. He was good at that, in the way some people are good at the small expressions of care while struggling with the structural ones. Carolyn appeared from the kitchen in an apron, flour on her hands, and I registered, in the specific radar of a person who has been on alert for years, that she was moving through the house with the authority of an owner, not a guest, not even a resident, an owner, the particular looseness of someone who doesn't have to think about whether they belong in a space. "Carter," she said. "Good, you're here. Can you set the table? The good placemats are in the buffet." This was typical. There was never a hello without an assignment. I'd learned not to read it as hostility. Carolyn showed love the same way she showed everything else, through management. "Sure," I said. "Willa, sweetheart," she said, and she was not unkind when she said it. She was genuinely warm in tone. "Why don't you and Theo go set up in the kitchen? I've got it all ready for you." This is the moment I should have said something. You can see it from here. The trajectory is clear. But I stood there with my hands in my coat pockets, and my children waiting on my lead, and I said nothing. Willa looked at me. She was 11, and she understood more than I wanted her to understand. She took her brother's hand and walked to the kitchen. I set the dining room table. I placed the placemats, the good ones, the ones my mother had bought at a craft fair in 1999, and which Carolyn kept because they were nice without knowing or caring who had bought them. I straightened the taper candles. I looked at the glass protector covering my grandfather's table and thought, for the first time with complete clarity, this is mine. Not in the sentimental sense, not in the this is where I grew up sense, in the deed and trust sense. This thought sat in my chest with a weight I hadn't felt before, and beneath it was a question I had been refusing to ask for 3 years. How long am I going to let this continue? That question, for the record, does not get answered until the end. You're going to have to stay with me. Dinner was normal in the specific way that Thanksgiving in complicated families is normal. The food was good. The conversation orbited safe topics. My father told a long story about a neighbor's fence that I'd heard twice before. Carolyn refilled glasses with a precision that would have qualified her for restaurant work. Outside, the temperature had dropped further, and through the dining room window I could see the mountains going pink at the top, where the last light was catching the upper snowfields. Willa and Theo ate in the kitchen. I ate at my grandfather's table and listened to the sound of my children's voices through the wall. It happened over dessert. Carolyn had brought out her pie. She made a very good apple pie. I want to be accurate about this. Some things can be true simultaneously. and was slicing it at the buffet when Theo appeared in the doorway. He was 8 years old and had not yet developed the antenna for room dynamics that his sister had. He wanted pie and didn't know the protocol, so he simply asked, "Can I have pie?" "Of course, sweet," Carolyn said. "Go sit back down in the kitchen and I'll bring you a piece." "Can I sit in here?" Theo asked. He looked at the table. He looked at me. "With Dad?" Carolyn set down the pie server. She turned around fully, and in the turn there was a decision being made. I could see it. A calculation about how to handle this. And instead of the usual maneuvering, something shifted into a directness I hadn't seen from her before. "Theo, the dining room is set for adults tonight. There's a very nice spot for you in the kitchen, and I'll bring your pie right to you." "But it's the same pie," Theo said. "Theo," I said quietly. He looked at me. His face was completely open, the way children's faces are when they're genuinely confused and haven't learned yet to cover it. He went back to the kitchen. My father was looking at his plate. Carolyn served the pie. She placed a slice in front of me with a smile that was genuine, or genuinely intended. "He's so sweet," she said. "You've done a good job with them, Carter." I looked at my pie. "Thank you," I said. And then, and this is the moment the story actually begins, the thing the title was pointing at all along, she said it. Not to Theo, not to the kitchen, to me. Over the table. In the house my mother built, and my grandfather's hands furnished, and my trust owned. She said it clearly, as a statement of reasonable arrangement, as a clarification she imagined we both already understood. Your kids don't belong at this table. She said it the way people say the quiet part out loud, meaning it as sensible, as the reasonable summary of the structure she'd established over 3 years, a thing she apparently believed I agreed with or at least had accepted. "I've set it up much better for them in the kitchen," she continued. "Kids do better with their own space. It's not a criticism." My father was still looking at his plate. I want to tell you what I felt. Not just the anger. The anger was there, yes. The protective fury of a parent who has watched their children be gradually, consistently, cheerfully diminished. But beneath the anger was something I can only describe as a structural realignment, like a diagnosis finally landing, like the moment in surgery when you stop searching and know exactly where the problem is. She thought this was her table. She had rearranged the chairs around it, covered my grandfather's wood with glass, made 3 years of decisions about who sat where and who ate where, and which children belonged in which room, all from a position of authority she had assumed, and nobody had corrected. And she didn't know. She genuinely, completely, had no idea. I took a bite of pie. It was good pie. I noted this with the part of my brain that was running parallel to everything else. The part that keeps cataloging irrelevant details in important moments. Probably a coping mechanism I developed in veterinary school when I needed to stay calm during things that warranted the opposite. I put the fork down. "Carolyn," I said, "what do you know about the property trust?" A pause. "What?" she said. "The Eleanor Hale Family Trust," I said. "The one that holds the deed to this property." She looked at my father. My father looked at me. "David handles all of that," she said, slowly. "He does," I said. "Sort of. He manages the day-to-day. But the trust is administered by the trustee." I paused. "I'm the trustee." The dining room was very quiet. Outside, the wind had come up. It does that in the evenings in the valley, sweeping down from the mountains in long, cold currents. And I could hear it against the new windows she'd had installed in the spring. Good windows. Expensive. Installed without trustee approval. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means," I said, "that I own this property." The silence that followed had weight to it. Not empty, full. full of 3 years of assumptions rearranging themselves in real time, full of the particular horror of a person who has been operating with complete confidence inside a structure they didn't build and don't own. My father said, "Carter?" "Dad," I said, not unkindly. "This is a conversation that should have happened 3 years ago. I'm not angry at you for not having it. But we're having it now." Carolyn had sat down. I hadn't noticed her sit down, but she had, and she looked, and I want to be precise here, because she deserves to be seen fully. She looked like someone who has just stepped on ice they thought was solid and felt it move. Not cruel, not calculating, genuinely stunned. And beneath the stun, something else. Something that looked, if I was reading it correctly, like a grief she hadn't been expecting. She had built something here. I understood that. She had poured 3 years of herself into this place. The curtains and the floors and the cabinets and the candles and the tablecloths and the ceramic owls arranged on the windowsill in the den. A row of them, watching the room with their small painted eyes. And she had believed, sincerely, that she was building a home, not taking something, building. I didn't say that out loud, but I held it. "I need to understand," she said finally. Her voice was careful. "Are you saying the house is in the trust?" I said. "Yes." "And you administer it?" "Yes." "And David can't. He has lifetime tenancy," I said. "He can live here. He can use the property. He can be comfortable here for the rest of his life, which is what I want for him. But he can't sell it, substantially modify it, or make decisions about it without my approval as trustee." She looked at my father. He was looking at the table, at the glass surface of the table, at the wood underneath it, wood he had lived with for 30 years and which had never been his to give. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked him. Her voice had changed. Something raw had entered it now. "David, why didn't you tell me?" He didn't answer right away, and when he did, it was the honest answer, the one I had suspected and which was worse for being true. "I didn't want to make things complicated." The air went out of the room. "I want to stay here for a moment, because this is the part that matters most. Not the property, not the paperwork. The 3 years of a woman building her life in a house she had been allowed to believe was hers to build in. The specific damage of being given incomplete information by the person you trust most. The fact that Carolyn's assumption had not formed in a vacuum. It had been maintained by my father's silence, and by my silence, and by the general human preference for avoiding conversations that might upset the arrangement. She had been put in this position. She had also, genuinely, been difficult. Both those things were simultaneously true. People contain more than one version of themselves at once. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, the sunroom. "I'm not going to approve it," I said. "Not to punish you, because it's not the right project for this property." "The floors in the master bedroom." "Those I'm not concerned about. The house needs to be livable." "The kitchen cabinets." I looked at the kitchen, through the doorway where my children were eating pie, probably listening to everything, because children always listen to everything, with the particular focused attention of people who understand they are watching something important, even when they can't fully articulate what. "Those are fine," I said. "What isn't fine?" she asked. There was challenge in it, but also, I thought, a genuine question. She wanted to know the shape of the line, where she actually stood. "What isn't fine," I said, "is my children eating in the kitchen while adults eat at my grandfather's table." She looked at the table, at the glass protector, and something in her face moved. Not capitulation exactly, but recognition. A recalibration happening in real time. "I didn't know whose table it was," she said. "I know," I said. and then I went to the kitchen doorway and looked at my kids. Theo had apple pie on his face, which was the most Theo thing possible, and which I mention because the human detail of it, the absolute normalcy of an 8-year-old with pie on his face in the middle of a pivotal moment, is the thing I remember most clearly. Willa was watching me with those watchful eyes she'd developed over years of family holidays. The eyes of a kid who has learned to read adult rooms and calibrate her expectations accordingly. "Grab your plates," I said. "You're eating in the dining room." Carolyn didn't say anything. My father looked up. Willa picked up her plate with the deliberate calm of someone who has been waiting for a permission she wasn't sure would come. Theo grabbed his fork and his remaining pie and walked into the dining room like he'd been walking in there his whole life, which is the specific dignity of an 8-year-old who doesn't fully understand the situation, but knows that something has shifted in his favor. I moved the glass protector off the table, set it against the wall. The walnut surface, dark grain, slightly uneven, a small scar near one corner from something decades ago that no one remembered the origin of anymore, was just there, just exactly what it had always been. My grandfather's hands had run across it. My mother's hands had set it and cleared it for 30 years. My hands knew the grain of it without trying. I pulled out a chair for Willa, and this is the fastest part of the story, because the climax of a thing is often not a speech or a confrontation. It's a single action, one clear motion that everything before it has been building toward. I sat down at the head of my grandfather's table, in my mother's dining room, in my house, with my children on either side of me, and I ate the rest of my Thanksgiving dinner. Nobody spoke for a while. Then Theo asked my father what the horses' names were, because Theo is constitutionally opposed to letting atmospheric tension go uninterrupted for longer than 90 seconds. My father answered. The conversation moved. The evening continued, but Carolyn sat very quietly. My father sat very quietly, and underneath all of it, something had been permanently rearranged. The way a bone heals differently after a fracture, slightly altered at the break, holding more carefully in the place it once gave way. In the weeks after Thanksgiving, I had the conversation with Carolyn that should have happened 3 years earlier. Not at the table, not on the holiday, but in my father's living room on a Saturday in December, while he was out checking the horses and the house was quiet, and the mountains outside were going white all the way to the valley floor. She sat on the couch she'd chosen. I sat across from her in the chair my mother used to read in. Carolyn had reupholstered it, burgundy to match the dining room chairs, and I had not said anything about it, and I still didn't, because the chair was still the chair. She had a cup of coffee. I had nothing. "I want to tell you something straight," I said, "so we both know where we stand." "All right," she said. "I'm not trying to take anything away from you," I said. "My father is happy. You're good for him. I've watched that for 3 years and I believe it. That matters to me, genuinely, because he is my father and his happiness is something I care about." She held her coffee with both hands and looked at it. "But this is my property," I said. "Not in the emotional sense, in the legal sense. Any decisions about it, structural changes, major modifications, what gets built and what doesn't, those go through me. That's not going to change." "And the sunroom?" she asked. "I'll consider it," I said. "If you want to have that conversation with proper documentation and a project plan, we can have it. I'm not opposed to improvements. I'm opposed to improvements I don't know about and haven't approved." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've spent 3 years in this house." Her voice shifted, the rawness from Thanksgiving returning. "I thought I was making it better. I thought I was taking care of it. I wasn't trying to take it from you." "I know that," I said. "That's why we're having this conversation." And here is the moment that complicates the story into something real rather than something easy. The moment that earns the weight I've been asking you to carry with me." She said, "My first husband's family had property. When we divorced, none of it was mine. I had nothing." She paused. "When I moved in here, I thought I finally had a home. Your father let me believe that." I didn't speak for a moment, because what she was describing was a wound that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with why she had moved so quickly, so completely, so thoroughly into the ownership of this space. She hadn't been conquering territory. She had been, in her own frightened understanding of security, trying to build ground beneath her feet that she could trust not to vanish. The ceramic owls, the tablecloths, the heated tile floors in a magazine, all of it was the same motion, repeated in different materials. Please let this be mine. Please let me stay. My father had allowed her to believe she could, and then stood silently in the kitchen of his own inadequacy while the belief took root and grew, and eventually, inevitably, said the wrong 11 words over a walnut table that was never his to loan. "Carolyn," I said, "you have a home here. Legitimately. My father loves you. His tenancy is his for life, and I have no intention of disrupting it. But you need to understand, fully, actually understand, whose home it is." She nodded. The nod of someone incorporating a difficult truth, not dismissing it. It was not a complete resolution. I want to be honest about that. The conversation didn't fix 3 years. It didn't undo the hundreds of small moments my children had spent being made to feel like visitors in a house full of photographs of their father. Willa's developed wariness doesn't dissolve in a single talk. Theo's cheerful adjustment of his own expectations to match whatever adults allowed. That's a thing that takes time to undo, if it fully undoes. My father and I spoke the following week. In the barn, because he always talked better in the barn, with something to do with his hands, leaning on a fence post with one of the horses looking over his shoulder, with the mild curiosity of an animal who has watched many human conversations and found them generally beneath comment. The cold was settled in by then, the kind of deep December cold that Montana wears like a fact, the frost on the barn walls catching the morning light in a thin glitter. "Why didn't you tell her?" I asked him, not angry, genuinely asking. He was quiet for a while. "At the beginning, I thought I'd wait until we were more settled. Then we were settled, and it seemed like correcting it would upset things. Then it had gone on so long it felt—" He shook his head. "Like correcting it would be admitting I'd lied." "You had lied," I said. "Not maliciously, but by omission, for 3 years. You'd let her believe something that wasn't true." "I know," he said. "She's hurt," I said. "Not at me, at you." He nodded. He knew. "I need you to fix that," I said. "With her. I don't need an apology from either of you. That's not what this is. But she's operating in your marriage on a foundation you hid from her, and that is yours to repair." He looked at the horse. The horse looked at him with the deep, placid judgment of a 30-year-old quarter horse who has seen everything and holds opinions about none of it. One of them exhaled a long breath that rose and dispersed. "I know," my father said. I drove home that afternoon with Willa and Theo in the back seat. The mountains were doing their December thing, serious, enormous, white, and completely unconcerned with any human drama happening at their feet. Theo had fallen asleep before we hit the first turnoff. Willa was looking out the window. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "Are we going back to Grandpa's for Christmas?" I thought about the dining room, the walnut table, uncovered now. I had not replaced the glass protector when I left on Thanksgiving, and my father had not replaced it either, and it had sat there in the interim in its original state, which was to say in my grandfather's state, in my mother's state, in the state things exist when they are simply what they are without being managed. I thought about my grandfather's hands building that table in a barn in 1947, not knowing that his daughter would grow up eating at it, or that her son would someday have to make a specific choice about it, or that his great-grandchildren would eat pie at it on a November evening in a room smelling of taper candles and cold air coming under the back door. "Yeah," I said. "We're going back. Are we eating at the big table?" "Yep," I said. She turned back to the window. She was quiet in the particular way she was quiet when something had been resolved that she'd been carrying a while. Not the quiet of held breath, but the quiet of something set down. Here is what I have come to understand about the 3 years before that Thanksgiving, and about the general category of situations it represents. There are people in your life, and if you've had a complicated family, you know exactly what I mean, who will move into a space you haven't defended and fill it completely and efficiently and sometimes even lovingly, and they will not know they are doing something wrong because no one has told them where the lines are. And there are people who allow this to happen, who stand at the edge of the conversation that needs to happen and choose the exit marked peace at any price, without understanding that the price is paid by other people, by children who eat in kitchens, by daughters who grow up understanding, at the cellular level, that they are conditional guests, by 8-year-olds who ask perfectly reasonable questions about photos on a hallway wall and are told they don't belong there either. I was one of those people. I stood at the edge of that conversation for 3 years and chose the exit, and my kids paid for it in 100 small moments I cannot take back. My mother would have said something the first time. She would have said it quietly and precisely and without drama, and that would have been the end of it. I am 41 years old, and I am still becoming the person she assumed I already was, which is either hopeful or embarrassing depending on the angle you view it from. At Christmas that year, my children sat at the dining room table. Willa helped set it, using my mother's placemats, running her hand over the walnut grain first the way you touch things you recognize. Theo knocked over a water glass, with a speed and decisiveness that suggested he had been planning it for some time. And nobody sent him to the kitchen over it. Carolyn mopped it up without comment, which was, in its way, a gesture. Not a transformation. A gesture. The ceramic owls remained on the windowsill in the den. She cooked the same meal she always cooked and called my father Davy and refilled glasses with the efficiency of someone who is good at care. And at the table this time, we were all there together. I don't have a triumphant ending. The trust still holds the property. Carolyn and my father are still together. The sunroom is still under discussion. Smaller now, different placement, and I am not opposed to it. The kitchen cabinets remain cream white. The glass protector for the dining room table is in the garage, and nobody has asked about it, and I don't intend to bring it up. What I have is this. My children will sit at every table in this house, because every table in this house is mine, and because the truth, it turns out, is the one renovation that does not require anyone's permission, costs nothing to install, and once it is finally in place, finally spoken out loud over good pie at a walnut table on a cold November evening in the Gallatin Valley, holds the whole structure up. Willa looked at me across that Christmas table and didn't say anything. She just picked up her fork. Some things are simply, finally, enough.